I'm Steve Wiggins, and this is the Groundworks Ministries podcast. Today we're reading from the book of Exodus, chapter 12. So let's focus on verses 43 through 49. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "This is the statute of the Passover. No foreigner may eat it. But any slave a man has purchased may eat it, and after you have circumcised him, a temporary resident or a hired hand may not eat the Passover. It is to be eaten in one house. You may not take any of the meat outside the house, and you may not break any of its bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate it. If a foreigner resides with you and wants to celebrate the Lord's Passover, every male in his household must be circumcised, and then he may participate. He will become like a native of the land, but no uncircumcised person must eat it. The same law will apply to both the native and the foreigner who resides among you." That's Exodus 12, verses 43 through 49. A few years ago, I was invited to lead music at a church in California. And maybe it was just vacation time for that church staff because they also hired a guest preacher. And before the service, I asked the preacher what his topic and his text were because perhaps I had a special song that would set up his message. And the preacher said he was going to cover the Passover. That was good news to me because I had led many believers through the Passover Seder meal. And I had taught about how what most Christians call the Last Supper, how that was actually the last Seder. And so you can imagine my shock when the preacher began his message with this statement: Gentiles are forbidden to celebrate the Passover. Christians shouldn't celebrate the Passover. Well, what was this? Where did he get this opinion? He had taken today's passage out of context. Thusly, he overlooked most of the messianic imagery in the Passover. So true, today's passage does begin with the statement, "No foreigner may eat it." But it goes on to define what a foreigner is in the eyes of the Lord, one who has not been circumcised. And then, of course, that begs the question, what is circumcision? Circumcision is a surgical procedure that God commanded the men of Israel to undergo. Literally, it means cutting around or cutting away. And so circumcision is a physical testimony that one has cut himself away from the fleshly world and has desired to distinguish himself as a follower of God. Circumcision was meant to be an outward expression of an inward condition. Hence, it is possible to be outwardly circumcised and yet inwardly wicked. Consider these verses from the Jewish prophet Jeremiah, chapter 4, verse 4. "Circumcise yourselves to the Lord and remove the foreskins of your heart, men of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem, or else my wrath will go forth like fire and burn with none to quench it because of the evil of your deeds." Or what about what the Apostle Paul told the church in Rome in Romans 2, verse 29? "No, a person is a Jew inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, brought about by the Spirit, not by a written law. That person's praise will come from God and not from people." Then you have the Gentile Moabitess, a girl from Moab named Ruth. She's not a Jew, but she'd been married to a Jewish boy and he had died, and now here she was making this statement to her mother-in-law. She said this, "Your people are my people. Your God is my God." You see, Ruth was included among God's people. Why? Because of her statement of faith. She was circumcised of heart, as it were. Also, we are included into the community of the Messiah whenever we profess Jesus as Savior and Lord. It doesn't make you a Jew, it doesn't make you Jewish. All of a sudden your Hebrew DNA shows up. No, you're still Gentiles, and yet you become the people of God by grace through faith. Our hearts become circumcised, as it were, for we are cut away from the world, set apart for God by the blood of the Lamb. And that's because the Messiah, Jesus, is our Passover sacrifice. Therefore, If Gentile believers can't truly celebrate the Passover, well then who can? I'm Steve Wiggins, and this is the Groundworks Ministries podcast. Check us out at groundworksministries.com.